My brother got married last weekend. I didn't hear it from him. I didn't get a text, a call, not even a lazy group message. I found out because the photos hit my screen before his voice ever did. Him under string lights, smiling like he hadn't cut his own brother out of his life. When I finally reached him, his fiancée grabbed the phone before he could speak. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, and cold enough to stick. "My wife doesn't want you there," he muttered, after she whispered something, then louder. "She thinks you're..." Pathetic. He didn't defend me. He didn't even clear his throat. He just let her words hang there like they belonged to him. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I stepped back, looked at everything I'd done for him over the years, and made one decision that rewrote the future he thought he'd built without me. Before I go on, where are you listening from? And if you were in my place, what would you have done? My name is Carter Marshall, and loyalty used to mean everything to me. It held my whole family together. At least, that's what I believed. I learned the weight of it at 23, standing in a hospital hallway signing papers. I wasn't ready for while my 16-year-old brother, Evan, shook against my shoulder. Our mother, Julia, was gone before either of us understood how suddenly a life can end. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just his older brother anymore. I became the person who figured things out, who paid the bills, who made sure he didn't drown in grief or get lost in the cracks our mother's death opened beneath us, and I kept that role for more than 15 years while guys my age were chasing promotions, buying condos, building their own lives. I took whatever jobs I could. Warehouse shifts, delivery routes, late-night security gigs. Evan had textbooks to buy, club fees, application costs, senior trips, and a college dorm that needed furnishing. I covered all of it, not because he asked, but because I couldn't let him fall. When Evan started college, I bought a small loft in the Crossroads district under my name. When Evan left for college, I thought things would finally get easier between us, and like the distance would help him appreciate everything I'd carried. Instead, it turned him into someone I barely recognized. The loft I bought in the Crossroads district was supposed to be temporary at first, a place where he could crash during holidays, store his things, and have a stable home base while I worked, saved, and scraped my way forward. But somehow it became his address more than mine. His friends came through more often than I did. His stuff filled the closets. His noise filled the rooms. I never said anything. That was the problem. I let him take, and take, and take, because after Mom died, I was terrified of being the one person who ever said no to him. His tuition went up, his club fees went up, his expectations went up even faster. I'd hear him on the phone bragging to people about his loft, his setup, his place in the city. Not once did he say, "My brother worked 3 jobs to keep me afloat." Not once did he mention the nights I slept in my truck between delivery shifts, because it made more financial sense than driving home. But I didn't complain. I told myself this was family, and family meant sacrifice. By his junior year, he'd moved a girl into the loft without asking. A girl he kept insisting was serious, even though she treated me like some distant, unwanted obligation. Her name was Tessa, the same woman who would later call me pathetic. I should have seen it. Then, the way she looked at me, like I was a reminder of where Evan came from, like I wasn't part of the future she was building with him. One night, I came home early from security work and found the two of them arguing in the kitchen. I don't think they knew I was standing in the hallway. "He's always around," she snapped. "We're adults, Evan. You can't let him keep controlling everything." "Controlling?" Evan hissed back. "He pays for this place." "And that's exactly it," she said, "and grow up. Stop letting him run your life. Run his life." If she knew how many times I'd skipped meals so he didn't have to skip a fee or drop a class. I stepped back before either of them noticed me, shut the door to my room, and told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. He'd graduate. They'd move out. Things would calm down. Didn't realize then that she wasn't pushing him to grow up. She was pushing him away from me, and he was letting her after graduation. Things shifted fast. Evan found a decent job, and instead of being grateful, he became distant. He called less. He came by the loft only to grab things. He stopped asking how I was. He stopped noticing the exhaustion on my face, the overtime hours, the fact that I was still paying off his loans, because he'd get to it eventually. When He met Tessa's family. Everything got worse. They had money. Real money. The kind that made him want to pretend he hadn't. Grown up watching me choose which bills we could afford each month. Suddenly, he wasn't proud of the life I'd built. For him, he was embarrassed by me. The wedding. Planning began without me ever knowing. The invitations went out. The rehearsals happened. Dozens of photos were taken, and I was nowhere in them. Not forgotten. Excluded. When those pictures showed up on my phone, something long and heavy in my chest finally snapped. Not anger, not jealousy, just a cold, steady clarity. After everything I had given him, after everything I had carried alone, he erased me, and whether he knew it or not, he had just given me permission to stop holding his world together. Before I continue, tell, from which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. I didn't sleep the night I saw those wedding photos, not because I was crying or raging or planning some dramatic scene. No, I just lay there staring at the ceiling of the loft I worked myself half dead to keep, realizing it had never really been mine at all. Not in Evan's eyes, not in Tessa's, not in the version of their life where I was the burden they pretended to outgrow. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. I scanned IDs, watched empty hallways, drank stale coffee in the security booth that smelled like dust and disappointment. Nobody there knew I'd been cut from my brother's wedding, like a defective part. Nobody knew the bitter kind of loneliness that comes from realizing you were never part of someone's future. You were just a stepping stone they didn't need anymore. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Evan. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not because I was hopeful, but because I already knew this call wasn't an apology. Sure enough, when I answered, his voice was uncomfortable. Clipped, rehearsed. Hey, I just wanted to explain. That's what people say when they're about to lie to you in a polite tone. He cleared his throat. We kept it small. You know, budget and all that. I almost laughed. Tessa's family could afford a small island, let alone a wedding. He kept talking, and things have just been weird. Between you and Tess, she didn't feel comfortable there. It was the excuse I knew was coming. She didn't feel comfortable, the same line people use when they want to exclude someone without admitting they wanted them gone. Didn't say anything. I let him talk. She thinks you're too involved, that you don't let go, that you hold things over me. Hold things over him? I swallowed the bitterness crawling up my throat. I'd held everything for him, not over him. He kept going, his voice cracking just a little. She said it'd be better if you just gave us some space. Space. I'd given him years of it. Space to grow. Space to succeed. Space to live the life I supported with my own hands. But suddenly that wasn't enough. He wanted space from me, but not from anything I'd provided. Then he said something that finally made the numbness in my chest twist into something sharp. Look, you're my brother, but you gotta understand, we're building our life now. You can't be in everything. Everything. The word hit me harder than the wedding photos, because he was right. I was in everything. I had been in everything since the night our mother died and the weight of adulthood dropped on my shoulders before I turned 24. But now that he had a new life, a new family, a new story to tell, he wanted to erase the chapters. I exhaled slowly. All right, I said, just that one word. No anger, no pleading, no guilt for him to manipulate. Just a clean, simple acknowledgement that the brother I raised didn't exist anymore. He seemed relieved, actually relieved, that I didn't argue. Good, he said, and, about the loft. Of course, the real reason he called. Tessa thinks it's not healthy for us to rely on you anymore. She wants us to take over the payments, make it ours legally. There. It was not space, not boundaries, control, ownership, possession of something I bled years for. I closed my eyes, not in anger, but in the coldest clarity I'd felt in a long time, up until that moment. Every dollar I spent on him, every hour I worked, every sacrifice I made, I had treated it as love, but now I saw what it really was. Debt he never planned to repay, life he never planned to share. History he was trying to rewrite, without me. When the call ended, I didn't say goodbye, didn't text him afterward, didn't explain myself. I just stood in that security booth, staring at the reflection of a man who had spent years carrying someone who was perfectly capable of walking away. And at that moment, I made a quiet decision. If Evan wanted a life without me, I'd give it to him, completely, brutally, and in a way he would never see coming. The silence after that phone call became its own kind of companion. It followed me through the rest of my shift, lingered in the walk to the parking lot, and sat beside me in the truck as I drove home. For the first time in years, I didn't stop to pick up groceries. For Evan, I didn't check my banking app to see how much I could spare for his loan payments. I didn't think about what he might need. I thought only about what his life would look like if I stepped back completely. If the safety nets he took for granted simply weren't there anymore. By the time I reached the loft, a strange calm had settled over me, the kind you feel when you realize the storm has already hit and there's nothing left to brace for. Inside, the place felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because I could finally see it for what it was, a monument to years of sacrifice Evan never planned to acknowledge. His boxes were still stacked in the corner from the last time he swung by. His tools were spread on the kitchen counter. A hoodie I bought him lay on the back of the couch. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of his presence. Not as a guest, but as a quiet occupier of a life I never got to fully live myself. For 15 years I told myself this was noble. That devotion was its own reward. But staring at the mess he left behind without a second thought, I realized what it really was, a pattern of giving without boundaries, of loving without being loved back in the same measure. I walked to the small desk in the corner where I kept my files, new bills, loan documents, the deed to the loft. My hands didn't shake when I pulled out the folder with Evan's student loan information. I had been chipping away at it for so long that it felt like part of my identity. But as I set the papers on the desk, a quiet thought entered my mind. This isn't my responsibility anymore. The idea didn't feel cruel. It felt fair, something I hadn't allowed myself to consider in years. I opened my laptop, logged into the financial portal, and drafted a concise message to the loan servicer requesting the account be fully transferred into Evan's name. I wasn't punishing him. I was returning ownership of his life to the person who claimed he wanted independence. Then, I pulled out the deed to the loft. The weight of the document surprised me, maybe because it represented more than real estate. It was the proof of every night shift, every overtime hour, every disappointment I swallowed to keep us afloat. And now his wife wanted it handed over to them like a wedding gift. I didn't know I was expected to give. I stared at the pages and felt something inside me settle into place. If Evan wanted the loft as his, then he could decide if he was willing to pay for it, without my name shielding him from responsibility. But if he wanted me out of his life, he couldn't have the parts of mine that built his. That was the deal he created. I was simply honoring it. I spent the next few hours doing something I hadn't done in years, taking stock of my own life. I cleaned my room, packed the personal belongings I'd ignored while focusing on Evan's needs, sorted through old clothes, old memories, old versions of myself I had outgrown. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that maybe I had a future that didn't revolve around carrying someone who was fully capable of walking on his own. And as I worked, a quiet question formed inside me. Not bitter, just honest. What would my life look like if I put even half the energy into myself that I once poured into him? By midnight, the loft was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. The kind that feels like a reset. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, and realized I didn't owe Evan anger. Nor did I owe him explanations. What I owed him was the freedom he said he wanted. Not space, not distance, not a pause, but the complete absolute release of every responsibility I had carried since the day our mother died. In that moment, I understood something I should have learned years ago. Stepping away wasn't betrayal. It was self-respect. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to choose myself, even if Evan never understood why. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of mental quiet that comes after a long storm, when everything inside you finally settles, not because things are fixed, but because you've accepted what broke. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat at the small dining table, and reviewed everything I had decided the night before. The loan transfer request was done. My boxes were packed, my email drafts were prepared, All that remained was the practical step. Evan never expected me to take, letting go of the loft. As I opened the laptop, my mind drifted back to the day I bought it. I remembered standing in that real estate office, signing the papers with hands still stiff from an overnight delivery shift. I had been exhausted, worn down, but proud. I thought the loft would give Evan a foothold in the world, a place to study, to grow, to feel safe. I never imagined it would become the symbol of how thoroughly I'd erased my own needs to make room for his. And now, years later, with him married and moving on, the loft no longer felt like a shared foundation. It felt like evidence, proof of how one-sided our bond had become. That realization didn't sting anymore. It simply existed like a fact you can finally say out loud. I drafted a formal notice to the property management company stating that I intended to sell. My name was the only one on the deed, something Evan and Tessa conveniently pretended to forget. I read the email twice, then hit send without hesitation. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. If Evan wanted to build a life separate from me, then he would do it without standing on ground I paid for. The transaction would take weeks, maybe months, but the decision was already real. It was the first step in removing myself from a life that had grown around me without including me. Around noon, I drove to the storage unit where I kept the last boxes of our mother's belongings. It had been years since I'd opened the metal door, and dust rose in slow spirals as the hinges groaned. Inside were pieces of a life that felt like another world. Her recipes, her books, the blanket she used to wrap around Evan when he fell asleep on the couch. I sat on the concrete floor for a long time, letting memories drift in gently instead of crashing down. I realized then that I had spent so many years trying to protect Evan from loss that I never let myself face my own. I thought keeping the boxes untouched would preserve something, but all it preserved was a version of myself. Trapped in the past, I went through them slowly, sorting what to keep and what to release. I kept only what felt like it belonged to both of us: photographs, letters, small keepsakes that held the parts of our childhood untainted by what came later. The rest I carefully boxed up for donation. It felt strange at first, almost disloyal, but then a calm washed over me. Removing weight from the past didn't erase it. It simply made space for a future. Halfway through the process, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I opened it without thinking. Why are you transferring the loans? What's going on? Evan, the shortness of it revealed everything. Not concern, not remorse, just discomfort that the conveniences he'd built his life on were shifting. I didn't respond. He had wanted space. I was giving it to him in the most honest form possible. I placed the phone face down on the concrete floor and continued organizing the boxes. By the time the sun dipped low, the storage unit was nearly empty. I loaded the few things I kept into the truck, locked the door behind me, and drove away with a feeling I didn't recognize at first. Lightness. Not happiness, but the beginnings of freedom. Something in my chest felt less tight, as if the years of obligation had begun, loosening their grip. When I got back to the loft, I found another message from Evan, this one longer. More frantic. You're overreacting. We just needed some time. Tess thinks you being involved in everything isn't healthy. We didn't exclude you. It was complicated. Don't do anything stupid with the loft. Complicated. That's what people say when they don't want to admit they made a choice that hurt someone. I read the message once, then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to discuss. The relationship he wanted wasn't a brotherhood, it was conditional dependence. And I wasn't living in that version anymore. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by boxes of my own belongings for the first time in years, something became undeniably clear. Evan hadn't just walked away from me. He had walked away from the man who raised him, the man who stood between him and the world when he had no one else. And in doing so, he freed me from a duty I should have never carried alone. What he didn't know was that the changes had already begun, one decision at a time, decisions that would reshape everything he took for granted, and the next one would hit much closer than he ever expected. The next morning, I didn't wait for doubts or nostalgia or the familiar pull of responsibility to drag me backward. I woke with the same quiet steel running through me, but now it had direction, purpose. Evan had spent years assuming I lived orbiting around him, waiting for permission to make moves in my own life. Today, the orbit broke. I drove straight to the bank just after it opened. The clerk recognized me. Too many years of loan payments, transfers, and automatic deductions tied to Evan's education and early jobs. She smiled politely and asked how she could help. I want to close the supplemental account, I said. Her hands froze above the keyboard. The one linked to your brother's line of... Yes, I cut in. Close it today, she typed. Hesitated, then asked if I wanted to maintain access in case my brother needed emergency support. I almost laughed. He needed independence. I needed relief. No, I said, calmer than I felt. This chapter is done. As she processed the request, a weight shifted off me with every confirmation click on her screen. I wasn't just stepping away from financial obligations. I was stepping away from the role I had been trapped in since I was 17. Protector, provider, shield, parent. The account closed with a final digital chime, just like that. One more invisible rope untied itself from my life. Outside, I sat in the truck for a moment, letting the reality settle. Evan wasn't going to like any of this. He'd call again, text again, insist he had reasons, excuses, misunderstandings. But every message only confirmed what I already knew. He never expected me to stop carrying him, because he'd never learned how to carry himself. By mid-afternoon, I'd made my second stop of the day, my workplace. I hadn't taken time off in years. Not unless it was for one of Evan's emergencies, one of his milestones, one of his crises that required me to drop everything. Not. Today I met with the department manager. His office small, cluttered, but the man himself kind. He blinked when I told him what I needed. A break, I said plainly. Just a month. Paid or unpaid? I don't care. I just need time. He leaned back, studying me. You've worked here longer than almost anyone. You've never asked for more than a day. Everything all right? I nodded once. It's time to handle my own life for a change. Something in his expression softened. Without hesitation, he approved it. As I signed the paperwork, a strange realization came over me. This was what it felt like to choose myself. Not react, not compensate, not rescue. Choose. When I left the building, the air felt different, cooler, clearer. My future no longer looked like something I needed to brace for. It felt open, wide, and quietly waiting. I spent the rest of the day calling real estate agents, forwarding documents, reviewing market estimates for the loft. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten was missing. By the time evening rolled around, the loft had officially been listed for sale. A coming soon notice was already scheduled to appear by morning, and, around that same time, Evan finally called. Not texted, called. The phone buzzed on the table for a full minute. I didn't answer. I let it ring until the screen dimmed. Less than a minute later, the voicemail icon appeared. Didn't open it immediately. Made dinner first, a simple meal in a space that felt temporary and freeing. At the same time, when I finally sat down and pressed play, Evan's voice filled the room. Hey, I don't know what you're doing, but you're scaring Tessa and me. This isn't like you. Listen, we were planning to talk to you. Things just got messy. Maybe we handled it wrong. But selling the loft? Closing accounts? Come on, man. Don't do this. Let's meet tomorrow, please. Plea didn't spark guilt. It sparked clarity. He didn't want a relationship with me. He wanted maintenance of the life I had built for him. I deleted the voicemail without saving it. Not because I was angry, but because I finally accepted the truth. The old version of our relationship had ended long ago. I had just been afraid to bury it. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without waiting for someone else's crisis to pull me awake. My mind was still, my chest unburdened. I wasn't running away from Evan. I was simply walking toward myself, and while Evan had no idea yet, the next decision was already forming, one that would do more than shift his comfort. It would expose the truth he'd been avoiding, and, once it came out, nothing between us would ever return to what he thought was normal. The next morning, I didn't bother checking my phone. I knew Evan would be spiraling. Missed calls, long messages, maybe even apologies he didn't mean. I let all of it sit unanswered. For once, his urgency wasn't my emergency. Instead, I focused on the one thing I had avoided for years, pulling our mother's records out of storage and laying everything bare. I didn't go back to the unit. I had brought the few meaningful boxes home the night before, the ones filled with documents I had never fully sorted, legal papers, medical forms, custody arrangements, bills I had paid without ever telling Evan the real numbers behind them. I sat at the dining table and spread them out. page by page, year by year. What I found wasn't new, but seeing it all together, our childhood in hard ink was sobering. When our mother got sick, the hospital bills alone had been enough to drown a grown adult with a good salary. I was barely 18. The school counselor helped me apply for financial aid programs and hardship extensions. None of that had covered half of what we owed. I remembered signing documents with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, terrified that one mistake would mean Evan and I would lose the only home we had left. Evan never knew. Not the numbers, not the nights I worked doubles, not the days I sat in courtrooms declining offers from distant relatives who might take him in. He never knew that. While he was worrying about homework and crushes and soccer tryouts, I was negotiating with landlords and hiding final notices under my mattress. And then right there at the bottom of one folder, I found the envelope I'd been searching for. Our mother's letter. She wrote it the week before she died, in handwriting that had become shaky and thin. I had read it only once back then tucked it away because the weight of her words had been too much. This time, I read it slowly. James, you are the reason Evan will survive what's coming. You are his anchor. But promise me something. When he grows, when he has his own life, you must allow yourself to have yours too. Don't carry him so long that you forget. You are more than his brother. Sat back in my chair, the letter trembling slightly in my fingers. She had known long before I did. She knew the cost would come due someday, and now it finally had. Knock broke the quiet, not frantic, not angry, but deliberate. I opened the door and froze. Evan stood there. He looked exhausted, hair unkempt, eyes red, jaw tight. But there was something else too, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. Can we talk? He asked, voice low. I stepped aside and let him in. Not out of obligation, but because running from this moment wouldn't help either of us. He moved into the living room, stopping short when he saw the table covered in documents, proof of everything I had carried alone. His eyes scanned the bills, the unpaid notices, the hospital statements, our mother's handwriting. He swallowed hard. Why do you have all this? Because someone had to, I said, my voice calm. Someone had to keep us afloat. I didn't know, he whispered. You didn't want to know. I corrected gently. You grew up believing life just worked out, that things appeared when you needed them. But nothing we had happened by accident. Evan, I made it happen. He stood there, stunned, like the foundation of his world had shifted under his feet. After a long moment, he finally spoke. Why didn't you tell me? I met his eyes. Because I didn't want you to grow up feeling responsible for me. I didn't want you to feel the weight I felt. I wanted you to have a childhood. He looked at the papers again, then at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who trusted me to make everything okay. But those days were gone, so why now? He asked. Why pull away? Why sell the loft? Why all of this at once? Because you stopped being my brother, I said quietly, and started treating me like an obstacle. He blinked, stunned. I didn't. You did, I said. When you shut me out of your wedding. When you let Tessa talk about me like I was some overbearing problem. When you built a life on things I paid for but didn't think I deserved to be part of. And when you walked away, Evan, I finally realized I'd been holding on alone. He sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. Silence stretched between us. Honest, raw, necessary. When he finally looked up, his voice cracked. I don't know how to fix this. You're not supposed to fix it, I said. You're supposed to understand it. He nodded slowly, the truth settling over him like a heavy coat. Then he saw the letter. He reached for it, hesitated. Can I read it? I shook my head gently. No, not yet. Because some truths he still wasn't ready for. He looked confused, almost hurt. But he didn't argue. I stood, gathering the papers into neat stacks. You wanted space, I said. I'm giving it to you. But now that you've seen what you never bothered to ask about, the next step isn't mine anymore. He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him. Part of growing up is facing what you avoided. Part of loving someone is not only taking what they give, but giving back. You can decide if you're ready for that. He stood, nodding shakily. I'll try. Trying is a start, I said. He walked toward the door. paused and glanced back. Are you really selling the loft? Yes. A beat. Even if I need a place. I met his eyes. Steady. You have a wife, a home, a life. You don't need me to save you anymore. He lowered his gaze, absorbing that truth. Then he left. When the door closed behind him, the apartment felt different, not emptier, but clearer, like the air had been washed clean. Evan had taken the first step toward understanding, but the step he feared most, the one that would shake everything, was still ahead. Because the next truth wasn't about our past, it was about someone much closer to him, and once he learned it, nothing in his marriage, his comfort, or his assumptions would survive, untouched. 3 days passed without a single word from Evan. No calls, no texts, nothing. I didn't chase him. I didn't wait for his name to flash across my screen. I had spent too many years running after problems that weren't mine. This time, I let him sit with what he'd seen. Let him decide whether understanding was something he actually wanted, or just something he said to soothe guilt. On the 4th afternoon, as I was sorting through boxes for the moving company, someone buzzed my door. Not Evan, Tessa, her voice, sharp even through the speaker. Cut the quiet. Carter, open up. We need to talk. I almost didn't, but part of closure is facing the truth, even when the truth stands on your doorstep in designer shoes and entitlement. When I opened the door, she pushed her sunglasses up her nose and exhaled loudly, like being here was a chore. Where's Evan? I asked. In the car, she said. He doesn't want to come in until I handle this, like I was a stain on their perfect little narrative. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, eyes scanning the boxes. So it's true? You're actually selling this place? It's mine, I said plainly. Not his. Never was, she scoffed. Right, the loft, the loans, the bills. He told me you were obsessed with keeping control. A humorless laugh left me. If control means not letting a teenager become homeless? Sure, she made a face, one that told me she never once considered anything outside her own perspective. I came here to give you a chance, she said, crossing her arms. You're hurting Evan. He thinks you're abandoning him. He's an emotional guy, and you know how dependent he is on people showing up for him. Dependent, yes, on me, for his entire life. And the one time I stepped back, apparently I became the problem. Tessa, I said calmly. He's dependent because I spent 15 years being his safety net. You walked into the final chapter of a story you didn't read. She bristled. I don't appreciate being talked down to. I'm not talking down to you, I replied. I'm explaining what your husband never bothered to understand. Her eyes flashed. But beneath the irritation, something else flickered. Fear. Evan's been a wreck, she snapped. And honestly, I'm tired of dealing with it. He keeps saying there's more to the story, that you told him things you didn't. He's digging through old records, Carter. He's questioning everything. Good, he needed to. Why are you really here? I asked. She hesitated. Just a fraction, but enough. Finally, she sighed, the brittle confidence cracking. I need you to stop, she said. Whatever you're doing, undo it. The loan transfer, the loft, the distance. He's scared. And when he gets scared, he starts doubting everything, even me. There it was. The fear wasn't about Evan losing me. It was about her losing control. That's not my responsibility, I said. Maybe you should ask why your husband's faith in your relationship is so fragile. Her face reddened. You don't know anything about our marriage. I held her gaze, steady, unblinking. Then why? I asked quietly. Did he show up at my door and tell me he didn't know how to fix what he broke? Her mask cracked. He said that? Yes, she shifted, suddenly unsure of herself. Look, maybe things got messy. Maybe we should have invited you. But I thought you were too involved. I finished. She froze. Here's the difference, Tessa, I said. You see involvement as interference. I see it as family. Evan never had anyone before me. And when you decided I wasn't convenient for your wedding photos, he didn't fight it. That's not on me. That's on both of you. Silence. Then she let out a shaky breath. What do you want from us? She whispered. I don't want anything, I said. Not approval, not gratitude, not a seat at your table. All I want is space to build a life that isn't built around cleaning up messes. Evan never acknowledges. Her eyes softened, just slightly. Is that really all this is? Yes. She looked toward the hallway, where the car waited. Can we fix this? she asked quietly. You can, I said, by standing next to him instead of using me as a shield. For a moment, she just nodded. Her edges no longer sharp but tired. Then she left. A minute later, Evan approached the door, alone. He looked different, not defeated, not frantic, just humbled. Carter, he said softly. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He entered slowly. Like the room itself held a truth he feared but needed. I read everything, he said. All the records. Mom's notes. The legal papers. The jobs you worked. The debt you took on. I didn't know. I truly didn't know. You never asked? I said. He nodded, eyes down. I know, and I'm sorry. Not the easy kind of sorry. The real one. The room was still, heavy, quiet. I messed up, he continued. Not just the wedding. The whole way I treated you. I let Tessa make assumptions because it was easier than confronting how much I relied on you. I thought you'd always just be there, no matter how I showed up or didn't. His voice cracked. You raised me, he whispered. And I treated you like you were an obligation. I had outgrown. He took a breath. I want to fix this. Not with excuses. Not with promises. With work. Real work. I studied him. The man he was trying to become, instead of the boy he'd been allowed to. Stay, then start by understanding this, I said gently. I'm not leaving your life. I'm leaving the version of it where I was the only adult. He swallowed hard. I can do that, he said. I want to do that. For the first time. I believed him. He stepped closer. Eyes shining. You're my brother, he said. Not my safety net, not my backup plan, my family. And I want you in my life because you choose to be. Not because I expect it. I felt something shift. Slow. Careful. Earned. I nodded. We'll rebuild, I said. But step by step. Not all at once. His relief broke through him like sunlight. I can live with that, he said. We hugged. Not the desperate grip of old wounds, but the quiet embrace of two people, finally seeing each other. Clearly, when he left with Tessa, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt balanced. The loft was still sold. The loan transfer still moving forward. My life, finally, was becoming my own. But for the first time, the future didn't feel like running away from him. It felt like meeting him halfway. And honestly, that was enough.